Well, and I want to say thank you as well for your participation in things such as Operation Christmas Child and other things that are happening here from time to time. It's really neat. We can't necessarily invent all the great ideas, but we certainly can come in alongside those who have and be a part of their ministry. So thank you in advance. That is a huge pumpkin. Wow. Crazy. That's a lot of pumpkin pies right there. I'm not sure where it came from, but I don't know that I've seen one that big before. That's awesome. Who brought the pumpkin? Okay. Oh, there we go. Norm, good job. I don't know that I've seen one that big for a long time. Phenomenal. God is good, isn't He? And I love the color orange anyway. And so it seems like this is a good time of year for that. Okay. Well, it is good to be back. Thanks, Pastor Tom, for speaking last week, and I will continue the theme of renewing your mind and the theme of joy and Christ and seeing our joy increase little by little in this series, I hope. And so I'm going to continue this today. I was able to go for just a few days. I want to kind of reconnect with my family. I haven't seen them for a long time. And it seems like with Levi almost ready to graduate from high school and we're going to transition to the empty nest phase of life, it's almost as if I feel kind of a compulsion and a desire to get reacquainted with my siblings. I don't know if you've ever been there before, but it's you kind of neglect your siblings and your family, especially when they live at a distance over so many years when you're raising your family. And so, not that the job of parenting is ever done. It isn't. I mean, it's going to be ongoing. There's a part of us that would like to say, well, got that done. Now, what have you guys been doing for the last 20 or 30 years? There's part of that that I think we like to see it that way, but it's not necessarily that way. It's always the parental task is always in front of us. And so my joy has been renewed and increased because I've kind of feel like I've neglected them and was able to reconnect with them. And that's all part of life. Relationships are important. And family's important. And we're kind of learning that in this series. Let me just kind of bring us up to where we need to be here. I've got some slides here to help us with kind of reorienting ourselves to this series. It seems like we calibrate and recalibrate as we kind of go along, and that's good. But if we go to slide number 11 for me, if you would. Slide number 11. You had a handout today that was given to you in your bulletin, and so it's all there if you got a bulletin. And this is a handout that I'm not necessarily going to go over, but you know that I've been doing a brown bag once a month here for the last couple months, and if you want to sign up for that, feel free. And I'm learning an awful lot from these brown bags, and I'm listening, and you're getting an opportunity to speak to me. I'm getting an opportunity to speak to you, and I'm really enjoying it, and I'm learning things from the congregation. So it's a mutually blessing and satisfying experience. And besides that, lunch is pretty good too. So thanks, Barb, for putting that together for us. But one of the things that's come out of the brown bag is that sometimes you bring friends to church, and they're not necessarily church-going folk. And I would love to see that happen more and more and more. But when we're midstream in a series, I understand your friend or family member hasn't a clue really what they're walking into. And so one of the things suggested to me was that could you have a little orienting sheet of some sort that when our friend comes to church, we could just hand them the sheet and say, hey, just kind of glance over this. This will orient you to what Pastor Joey's talking about. And so he does book studies and things. He explains the Bible. And he does that kind of methodically and just steadily through it. But we understand that maybe you've not been here for every message. This is a little cheat sheet, kind of a Cliff's Notes to what he's been talking about. And so this is one of the things we hope to do, is to make this available. So we want Stones Hill to be the kind of place where you can bring unbelieving people, your friends, your neighbors, your family members, with no church background, no really comprehension or understanding of the Bible. We want this to be a place where they'll be loved, cared for, but at the same time taught truth, and it not be a waste of their time. So this is just kind of a slide to kind of show you what the sheet looks like. At least we'll run these in the bulletin maybe for a little while, and then we might just put them on the table in the back so that if you've got a friend with you or you see a friend, perhaps you could grab a sheet and give it to them or something, that kind of thing. Again, it's just to orient you to some basic things, and you've probably been over this before in this series with me, this information, so it may not be that new to you. And then there's some places also listed at the bottom on the back where they can go and get caught up if they would like to get caught up. Okay? Again, it's part of our attempt to close what we call close the back door. We have a lot of people come through our front door at Stones Hill, and they're with us for a while, but it seems like they slip out the back door and we don't see them again for a long time or maybe never. So, and we understand that Stones Hill is maybe not everybody's, meant to be everybody's church family or whatever, but we would certainly like for it to be yours. And if we can do any little thing we can do to close the back door, we want to do that, don't we? And so let's think about that. What can we do when people journey with us for a while? What can we do to help solidify them to this body? To their attendance would be stable. This would be their church family. They would be growing here. They would plug into small groups. We've heard about that this morning. They would track with us in the sermon series and things. This is what we want to do. We want to close the back door. Somebody else said, well, won't we just close and lock the front one too? And we'll just keep them all here all the time. Well, maybe that's what we'll have to do. I don't know. But no, we're not going to lock the doors on you, but we want to close that back door. And we're a church that runs about 300, 325. There's no reason why this church couldn't be a church of 400, 450 people every week. No reason for it. And so it's and that's just kind of some shop talk, inner thoughts I have. I've never been one to say, okay, let's see, let's just see how many people we can cram in a place so we can all boast about it. No, never been really approaching it that way. But if we are called to reach this community for Christ, let's do it. Let's do a good job of it. And let's make sure that we do everything we can, like I said, close the back door. Front door needs to be inviting, friendly faces, kind, cheerful dispositions, right? Joy-filled people, not perfect people, but joy-filled people. This is who we need to be. Understanding our vision, understanding our core values, marching forward with this vision and mission into a community to do some good. This is what we're called to do and to be. Now let's get after it, and by God's grace, and let's make sure that we let the love of Jesus flow through us to this end. Okay? So that's a bit of an explanation for that. Again, I know some of you have said, I had a friend with me and they listened to the message, and every now and then I would just whisper over and tell them who Paul was, and I'd whisper over and tell them who that Italian guard was that he was chained to, and I would just kind of whisper and just kind of have a little running commentary while you were talking. And that's good. This sheet will help you do that, okay? Slide number 9. Slide number 9, I've forgotten what's... Okay, here we go. We've, within a series, all right? Within a series, there's these themes. We can clump together thoughts underneath these broader theme headings and things. And I've kind of done that with the first chapter of Philippians, verse 12 through 26. And within these themes, or we could call them mature perspectives, there's some things that we need to consider that will increase our joy. I've talked to you about how adversity means advance. I've talked to you about how controversy causes rejoicing. Adversity means advance sometimes, and we've got to keep that mature perspective in mind, because when we're in adversity, we have to have the hope that maybe God is going to be glorified through this. Adversity means advance. And we have to have the hope when there's controversy and upheaval in our lives, in our relationships, in our family, that perhaps the controversy can cause rejoicing, and in fact it does many times for those who are dedicated to lifting up Christ. I'll talk to you about that. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about testing producing triumph. It's important for us to realize that's a mature perspective to bring to life. And then I'll probably wrap up the bulk of chapter 1. I'm not going to say I'm going to totally leave chapter 1. of Philippians, but I'll probably wrap up the bulk of it in dealing with the fourth and final mature perspective that in life that will produce joy in your life. And that is that absence yields presence. This world is not all there is. And when you understand that, your joy goes up a click. All right? And you're not making everything about this life only. There's something more. And we're going to, Paul kind of hints at that today. I want to say, before we kind of open up the text and begin to dig into this, I want to say thank you again for all the pastor appreciation gifts and things. It's meant a great deal to me. And some of you know me well. And so the things that you have given as just a token of thank you and appreciation for me have meant a great deal to me. And I thank you for that. It's been very, very beneficial for me. If we could, let's go to slide number 2. And we're going to be talking about the life purpose today. There was a girl, I don't know her name, several years ago. She scored a perfect score on the SAT. She also did a very rigorous California college entrance exam. She was from California. And did a perfect score on that test as well. Someone asked this young lady, what is, you're a smart young lady, you're sharp, obviously. Let me ask you a question. Shoot. What is, in your opinion, the purpose of life? What is, young lady, what is the purpose of life? You're obviously gifted, you're pretty sharp, you kind of got some things figured out. What do you think the purpose of life is? And she said, I have no idea. I have no idea. You can be very sharp in life and have a lot of talent and ability and not understand what life purpose is about. It's tough to define that, isn't it? To answer that question in a way that reflects what we see in the Bible, in a way that, how does the life of Christ help us define that question? How does our walk with the Lord help us define that question? Our family help us to define this question? Well, the Bible does a wonderful job of showing us and defining for us a true life purpose. And there's a guy by the name of Paul. Again, if you're new, he's kind of explained here on your sheet. And this guy went through a lot of things in life. A lot of controversy, yes. A lot of adversity, yes. But he goes through a time of testing where he's placed in prison for the gospel. And it's in this time of incarceration that he nails down a life purpose. And many times it takes a time of testing that eventually produces triumph, and that triumph being you come out of those times of testing with a clearer purpose on why you're here. And so as we look at this, we see, of course, slide 2, Paul says, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I'm in chains for Christ. So he's talking about some adversity in his past events. He talks about some present circumstances in verse 14. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. This was part of the rejoicing that he had. Even though he was in prison and people were giving him a hard time for that, God was using him to encourage the body to do their work. Slide 3, verse 15, it is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill, and the latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. And I've kind of explained that to you, what was going on underneath those verses and those words. Verse 18, but what does it matter, he says. What a great mature perspective in life. He's going to let the little stuff go, isn't he? Well, you can have joy if you're willing to do that. And what's some little stuff you need to let go? What's some little stuff in your life you need to say, well, what does it matter? What does it matter? there's a bigger objective being accomplished. Why are we so uptight about this? You say. That's a mature perspective of life that will increase your joy, and Paul shows us as much. Now, the important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this I rejoice, and yes, I will continue to rejoice. Then Paul, verse 19, he gets to this part where he says, "For I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance." What's he saying? Well, I'm either going to be vindicated in court, and the gospel will continue to spread, and I'll be set free. That's one option, one path, one way this thing may go. Or I'm not going to be released. I may even be eventually executed. But here's what I've determined. That whatever happens, God is shaping me through this. He continues to shape the body of Christ through this experience. He's going to shape me even more. Even though my future is uncertain, I know the Lord is going to use it to somehow advance His cause. And so he says, I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now as always Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. And so he's saying, guys, when it comes time for me to present my case in court, because of your prayers and the Lord's presence, I know and I fully expect that it will go well. He's very optimistic. And so he says, if I don't make it, then Christ is my judge and He will approve me on the other side of this thing. If I do make it, then the Lord will be lifted up through my living witness. And either way, I intend to stay faithful to the end. And what is more is that whatever is required of me will correlate to the amount of courage that is available to me through your prayers. So thank you for praying for me. In other words, to the Philippians, not only have you provided for me a special offering, but you're praying for me. You're lifting me up. I feel the Lord's presence as a result of your prayer. And I know the courage in me is mounting up. And so I eagerly expect, just can't wait for the opportunity to proclaim the gospel in a Roman imperial court and to see what God does with it. I know He's going to use it. And I want to lift up Christ. I want Him to be exalted in all of this. And then we come to those wonderful words in verse 21, which I think is really something that defines the purpose of life. And that is this. He says, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." To live is Christ. To die, it's still Christ. But it's a greater relationship with the one I love. So it is gain, you see. And I think when here we are in Ligonier, we're trying to figure out how my joy can increase in my life. And I'm trying to, figure out what my job means, what my family means, what these happenings that appear to be somewhat random, what they mean in my life. I'm trying to figure this out. I'm trying to increase joy. And the thing is, when we don't have a firm purpose in life, our joy takes a hit. Our joy suffers. It's difficult to have a measure of joy in life that sustains us when we have no earthly idea why we're here, you see. And so defining a purpose in life is so part and parcel to living a joy-filled life. It's knowing why I'm here. And we all have this question. Paul had gone through this time of incarceration. He's been 2 years journeying to Rome as a prisoner of Rome. He's gone through shipwrecks. He's gone through a lot of things And I think it's interesting, he says, I want God to be glorified in my body. His body has been abused and used, and somehow he has found joy, even though his body has gone through some very tough experiences and things. 2 years traveling to Rome. Now he's been in Rome for about 2 years. It's been a 4-year incarceration experience, but he has defined even more so coming out of this incarceration experience. And we feel like Paul eventually got set free, at least for a season, and then he was reincarcerated, and 2 Timothy gives insight into his martyrdom. He eventually lost his head for the gospel there in Rome. But here's a guy who is going through some tough places, and because he is so given to exalting Christ through all that he experiences, and all the things he's going through, and the times of testing, these things have proven to be a source of joy for him. Even the chains have proven to be a joy to him because they have allowed him to firm up a truer life purpose. And so when we go through things that challenge our identity, we go through things that challenge our mission, we go through things that challenge a deep sense of purpose and why we're here, and we hammer this stuff out, we have to realize that it is a good thing, because it is then that we truly get the opportunity to define our purpose. It's not about the cancer. It's not about the divorce. It's not about the addiction. It's not about some aberrant behavior I've chosen to identify with and thus create an identity, whether that's a deviant identity of some sort or addictive identity or whatever. We often want to take our name from whatever it is we struggle with. You see. And Paul comes into this and he says, guys, let me tell you, I don't know if I'm going to see tomorrow. I'm not sure. But I got joy, and I'm going to rejoice, and I'm going to tell you why. Looking at life from this position, right here, not knowing what the future holds, let me tell you what I'm so happy I've given my life to. And so Paul gives us kind of a view from what he thinks might be a potential finish line. On one hand, hopefully he'll get out, but eventually it was a finish line for him a few years later. And so what Paul is telling you, if you'll give your life to Christ, if you will adopt a Christ-centric worldview and life purpose, and you will let that define everything you are and all that you're about, the day is going to come when it's time for you to check out. And I'm telling you right now, he says, I'm looking back over this, and I can tell you it's people like the Philippians that made life worthwhile. It's the fact that I gave myself sacrificially for something. It demanded something of me. My body took hits over it. Yes, it was difficult. It was headache driven. I had some critics along the way. I've been incarcerated. Life has been tough at times. But I chose early in life that I was going to exalt one person and one primary individual in my life. And I'm going to play to that audience of one. And it is none other than the Lord Jesus Christ. And Paul says, if you'll live for Him, you'll come to your finish line someday and you'll look back and you'll think, man, I'm glad I did it that way. I'm glad I did it that way. I'll be honest here with you this morning. I've told my kids, I'm enjoying life. I'm enjoying my marriage, and I'm enjoying being a parent, and I'm enjoying my church family and friends, and I'm enjoying all the different things that your kids give you to kind of look into and learn about, whether it's a sport or whether it's a relationship they're working through, or it's a career, vocational decisions and things of this nature. It's fun being a parent, right? It's fun enjoying life. But I've told every one of them, guys, I don't care what you do with your life. Well, we want to listen to your life and kind of listen to what your life's already telling you to do, and that's how you want to go, okay? But I want you to honor Christ. In our family, that's what we do. We honor our Creator here. We don't live in selfish consumption. We don't just consume life. We give that head nod to God, and we give it often. And we don't just give the nod. We want our whole life to reflect a truer life purpose that's bigger and better than sports, it's bigger and better than careers, it's bigger and better relationships and all these other things. We want Jesus to be the center of our lives, okay? And that's what brings joy in the long run. It's what brings joy. And so pursue these things and shape and tweak those individual life purposes that God calls us to. Because it's true that every person is composed of a few themes, and it's important for them, though, to explore the various things of life and to kind of come to eventually rest on a life purpose and a life calling. But I'm saying, what is it that's beyond all of that we want our life to drive toward? And that is to live as Christ. To live as Christ. To live for Him. To lift Him up. To use whatever we got going for us. To use that in life to lift Him up. That is a true life purpose. And when we do it that way, then we can say death is truly gain. Right? And so, as we think about this, and you think about this, are you living the kind of life that you are lifting up one primary person in your life? Okay? And like I'm saying, the most joyful people that you will meet are those, go to slide 8 for me, are those who have a clear sense of personal identity, those who have a strong sense of mission, and those who have a deep sense of purpose. These are the most joyful people have addressed these issues in their life. If you don't have these things addressed in your life, it's easy to go out and get smashed. It's easier to get lost in relationships and do silly things with people you have no idea what you're doing. It's easy to get an attitude at work and cop an attitude and say things you shouldn't. When you don't understand this, your joy drops because you have no earthly idea why you're here. But when you understand these issues, what am I talking about? Well, a clear sense of personal identity. Paul had it. How does he start his epistle, or his letter to the Philippians? I'm a slave, a servant of Jesus. That's who I am. Paul, what do? I'm a servant of Jesus. That's what I do. Joey, what do? I'm a servant of Jesus. Well, I happen to be a father, and I happen to be a pastor. I happen to like sports. I happen to like really big pumpkins that are orange. Okay? These are the little things I like, but it doesn't define me. Totally. What are you about then? When it comes to the end of the line and you write that life sentence, you know how we all have a life sentence? Okay, our lives are summarized in a single sentence when it comes our time to move on. Well, for Paul, that life sentence, to live is Christ, to die is gain. What's yours? You're going to have a really tough time having joy in your life unless you can get a sense for what I'm talking about here. Paul had a sense for it. He had a clear personal identity. This is who I am, he says. I'm a servant of Christ. I'm here to lift up Christ. If I preach a message, Christ. If I watch a ball game, Christ. If I get awards at work, Christ. 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 It's all about Christ. You see, Paul understood the gospel to mean something radical had invaded our age. It is the gospel. It's an announcement of good news. Something has happened for all of us. The world has been redeemed and saved. It's an announcement that needs to be made. And he dedicated his life to making this announcement. Grace has come. God's great plan for the ages has currently broken into our age. And I can't get over it. I've never gotten past it. I can hardly comprehend it. And if you think, I'm spitting everywhere, okay? Sorry, Melissa. If you think, I'll go to this side, this empty row here. If you think that, I lost my train of thought. All right. If you think that you're going to have joy in your life with any other primary purpose for living other than Christ, you're going to eventually come to the place in your life where you're like, you know what, this wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Winning this is not as big as I thought it was going to be. Marrying them is not as great as I thought it was going to be. Getting that job is not, you're always going to face that. But when you realize you're living life for a greater, a transcendent cause that is bigger than you, that's going to outlive you when you're long gone. I went back to the cemeteries of my mom and dad, and my sister didn't realize she's going to be buried right next to them. Okay? And my dad is in the middle. My sister's going to be here. My mom's going to be over here. So my dad always said he was the rose between the thorns. I don't know if that works. He was always joking about that. But I just kind of look at those guys, or at least the tombstone and things, and you just kind of realize, you realize that the day's coming and old Joey's going to be right there with them. Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe I'll be buried here in Ligonier. Who knows? But someday it's going to come my time. And you guys are going to try to figure out, well, what was really Joey about? I don't want you to have to scratch your head and say, well, what was he about? I don't know. I have no idea. Well, you've come here long enough to know, hey, listen, it is about Jesus. I want it to be about Jesus and a clear explanation of the Bible, because that amplifies Jesus. See, that's what I'm about. And that's my calling. That's my life purpose, is to lift up Christ and clearly explain this. This is a special book. You want to know why. People want to know why. And it's really difficult because people go to churches expecting to have this explained. It's never explained. And see, I want to make sure that we stay on track. My life mission is to stay on track with this, to keep a body of believers on track with a vision that says, you know what, we're going to lead people to God's forgiveness. We're going to see them restored to all that God created them to be. And we're going to do that through a faithful proclamation of teaching, discipleship, teaching the Word, encouraging other people to walk in obedience. Okay? And so I'm just saying to you this morning, let's come back to our slide here. A clear sense of personal identity. You're not going to have joy unless you got this figured out. And Jesus says, you belong to me. God said, I created you, so you belong to God. Every one of you this morning, you belong to God. You are His. You are His special creation. Don't let anybody tell you any different. You belong to God. That's your identity. He's made you male and He's made you female, and He invites you to walk in your gender and warmly receive that and flesh out what that means and not challenge that and not confuse that. No. It's to receive that in which you've been created, and to have a clear sense of personal identity. You're created by God. You're either male or female. You belong to somebody. There's someone that loves you, and there's someone that's called you to reflect Him. You're made in the image of God. And you're either going to tarnish that, you're going to polish it. And so Paul chose to polish it. And the way he polished it was to lift up Christ with his life. And so God just shined through this guy. Even in prison, even in controversy, even in adversity, even in testing, he shined with joy because he had a rock-solid identity in who he was, and not just who he was, but whose he was. And I'm arguing and proposing this morning that your joy will increase when you get that figured out. Now listen, a strong sense of mission. This is what I'm created to do. I have something that I can offer to others in a self-sacrificial way, and a contribution I can make it, no matter how large or small. I'm going to do the little thing that I can do, and I'm going to stick with that no matter where I am. A strong sense of mission. Joyful people have this. And then a third thing here, a deep sense of purpose. This is who I do it for ultimately, you see. So I know who I am and whose I am. I have a mission in life. I know what I'm created to do. And I have this deep sense of purpose. I know who I'm doing it for. You see. And so in Paul's case, we could say it this way. He could say it this way. I am a Christ follower. I am called to plant churches in Christ's name, and I do it for one primary reason, to get the world ready for Christ's return. So for Paul, it was Christ. He answered these three questions. He shows us how he's answered these questions, these issues in his life. And my mission, he could say, my mission is staying on track. I'm in jail in Rome. chained to a Roman guard. I didn't plan it this way. I had large coliseums filled with thousands of people hearing me present the gospel in Billy Graham fashion and just as I am, and everybody coming to faith. And I had a picture that way. But it was a jail cell for me. And I'm going to stay on track with my mission, my identity, my mission, my purpose. I'm going to stay right on track. I'll change the venue. God will change the stage. I'm staying on track with these items in my life. And this is why Paul, it's not a secret, the secret of joy. Joy's not a secret. He very clearly shows us these little pieces. This is how you bump joy up in your life. When you understand these things. Okay? About yourself and about your God. And so, you may not be a church planner. I understand that. You may not even be in a career vocation that is your first choice. I've talked to people in that situation. But when you do your job with excellence, and you offer it to Christ, and you do it to lift Him up ultimately, it says a whole lot about who you are, how you view your work, and who you're doing it for. So I don't care what you do. You can lift up Christ in your vocation. You can lift Him up. And find joy, a measure of joy in it, because you're able to lift Him up in such a fashion. Now, I want to ask you a question this morning. Have you substituted something else for Christ in these words of Paul? You see, we could say, to me, to live is money. That gives me security, Pastor. I need money, and we understand that. I understand that. We do. But if we say to live is money, then to die is to lose it eventually. If we say to me to live is fame, that gives me significance. Well, to die is a name in the obituary section of the Advance Leader, and your name will never be there again. If we say to me to live is pleasure, that gives me distraction from boredom. Then to die is to go out into the great unknown of what is beyond this life as we know it. If we say to live is health, and then to die obviously is to lose our health. You see, the only thing that makes sense is for you to define your rock-solid life purpose in the very terms and concepts that Paul uses to define it for himself. And so, if you're a teacher, administrator, a bus driver, a cafeteria worker, a maintenance person, if you're a factory worker, if you drive a taxi, if you fly airplanes, if you practice law, if you write newspaper articles, whatever you do, ask yourself the question, how can I lift up Jesus in this? What can I do? Who am I? What is the mission He's called me to, as Paul defines it? What is the deep sense of purpose who am I lifting up in this? And I think only then can we really come to the place where Paul came to in his life and be able to say, you know what? I love the few I have from my finish line. I love the fact that I've given myself to the right things. I'm at peace. I have joy. I've talked to people before who work with in hospice settings and things, and they will tell you the people that have the roughest time dying are the ones who still have their grudges. There's still somebody they want to live for to get even with. And they hang on a little longer. They want to die because that means they can't get even anymore. And she's told me also the people that die the most peacefully, the people that are at rest, are those who have just surrendered their life to Christ. And it's like, you know what? I'm going to lift up Jesus with my life. And they slip away in peace because it's all dedicated to His honor and His glory anyway. Well, what about you? You know, Philip Yancey shares in his book, slide 12, he shares in his book, Rumors of Another World. He says, our lives form some sort of pattern, whether or not we consciously arrange it. He says, I have friends whose lives center on material possessions. Says Yancey, they scour the stock market pages each day. They maintain houses in several countries and buy new luxury cars every year. He goes on the right. He says, I have other friends who work at minimum wage jobs in deliberate rebellion against parents who pressed them relentlessly to achieve. I'm going to do minimum wage just so mom and dad can get a little taste of it, because they drove me nuts over what I was supposed to do with my life. I have friends, says Yancey, who boast about their 70 to 80-hour work weeks, and others who boast about sleeping till noon each day. Some women, Yancey writes, some women I know spend several hours each day keeping fit and making themselves beautiful. Others wear no makeup and disdain standards of beauty. I know a wine connoisseur who stores 10,000 bottles of vintage wine in humidity-controlled coolers. I know an alcoholic who can't keep a single unopened bottle in his house. And the girl down the street lives for weekend rave parties at nightclubs. Yancey writes, these life patterns grow out of natural desires and longings. Our bodies desire food and drink and stimulation and pleasure. He says at another level, though, we humans long for beauty. We long for love. We long for security and worth and meaning and purpose and belonging. He says everyone has such longings. We have these. But how we respond to them will determine the life patterns we develop and the direction that we go. And he says, if I see myself as more a species of animal, he says, with no life beyond this one and no accountability to a higher power, then why not follow the pleasure instinct to the end? But on the other hand, if I see this planet as God's world, and I see myself as created by God, and I see God hanging on to a fallen planet in Jesus and doing something very special for the world, and He calls me to live in that, in light of that news. If I see life this way, and I want to bring the two worlds together, then I do so by accepting that we are human beings and we must look beyond ourselves, above ourselves, for direction in ordering our desires. We must look beyond ourselves for a definition of what life purpose is really supposed to be. Alistair McGrath, a British guy who writes in his book Unknown God, page 123, he says, in the end, there are basically two attitudes that we can adopt to life. We can see it as meaningless, something which has no real purpose. In this case, the most that we can hope for is to make the best of it while we can, try to help others maybe a little less fortunate, distract ourselves from the fact that life is all pointless. Or we can see life as a glorious gift, something that is good in itself, yet which points to something even more wonderful that is yet to come. And even in this life, to have hints of this promised future, and to know that the hints of this promised future, sometimes it breaks in and allows us to see and anticipate what lies ahead. I think Paul saw it. And I don't know if he had any near-death experiences or what, but he certainly had experiences with God and experiences in his life that put him in a position to say, to live is Christ, to die is gain. And he also had experiences in his life that would lead him to write to the Corinthian believers that no eye has seen and no ear has heard, what the human mind has not conceived, the things that God has prepared for those who love Him. He wrote that. So what about you today? What about you? Can you define your purpose? Can this message enlighten your purpose, give definition and shape to your purpose? And what is your life sentence? What does that life arch say in your life? To live is what? Well, I'm arguing this morning the best possible way to define life is to say, to live is Christ. What about you? I've been a fan of near-death experiences for a long time. I've read a lot of different books on that, and there's actually a lot of books available in this area. It seems like in recent years. I read one recently, Slide 13, by Eben Alexander, a Dr. Eben Alexander. He wrote in his book, Proof of Heaven. It kind of intrigued me when I saw the proof of heaven. Well, who has proof of heaven? Well, it's not necessarily hardcore proof, but there's some experiential things that have happened to people along the way, and they've caught rumors of this other world. And I think Paul had caught a rumor of another world. And that's why he had joy. Well, this guy, a doctor, wrote about his experience, and you got to be careful when you read these kinds of books and things, because they can kind of get new agey and kind of take you off a path, maybe down a path that's maybe not good. But this guy says some things that intrigues me. He is a neurosurgeon. He got his MD from Duke University. In 2008, he tells us, at age 54, he got a rare illness. He was thrown into a coma for 7 days. And during that time, he says, my entire neocortex, the outer surface of the brain, the part that makes us human, it was shut down. He had no sense of time, but looking back later, they told him he was in a coma for like 7 days. And he learned that in this time, he came out of this experience saying things like, this life is not all there is. Death is not the end. There's something beyond. And this is a medical doctor who is making these kinds of statements. He said, this life isn't meaningless. It may feel that way sometimes to us, but there's so much meaning. He goes on to describe what happened to him. He had bacterial meningitis. The lining in his brain was swollen and inflamed. And he goes into great detail about the physiological things that were happening. But the reason he wrote the book was because of the spiritual things that were happening. He says, and he describes a bright presence. He says, when I was in this other dimension, I saw a bright presence, and it turned slowly, and it radiated fine filaments of white gold light. He says, I heard a new sound, a living sound. It was like the richest, most complex, most beautiful piece of music I've ever heard. And it's really interesting that many NDEs share that detail. And then at the very center of the light, he says, something else appeared. It was an opening, and I was no longer looking at the slowly spinning light, but I was looking kind of like through it. The moment I understood it, he said, I began to move, and it was just a whooshing sound, and in a flash I went through the opening, and I found myself in a completely new world, brilliant, vibrant, ecstatic, stunning. He says, I could heap on one adjective after another to describe what this world looked and felt like, and they'd all fall far short. And another thing he says that stood out to me, for whatever reason, he says, I saw millions of butterflies, and it was like a river of life and color that was moving through the air. There was a girl that met him. He described her as a high cheekbone, deep blue eye kind of girl, and Alexander didn't know who she was, and he never did know who she was throughout his experience, where he was experiencing life beyond life as we know it here in our dimension and things. But she looked at Alexander, and he said it wasn't a romantic look. It wasn't even a look of friendship. It was like, without using any words, she spoke to him through a look. He said the message went something like this: you are loved and cherished dearly forever. You have nothing to fear. She could kind of go back and forth. It was like she wasn't bound by the physical properties that you and I are bound by. He described it orb or angel-like. Could kind of morph from one form to another. And it was like she was on a butterfly wing, and she stayed with him during his time, or that season where he was in this other dimension. And it's interesting because Alexander, I wondered this when I was reading the book, he keeps talking about the girl on the butterfly wing throughout his book. And he never really understood it, and he didn't know who she was, and he was struggling to trying to figure that out, because she was surrounded by these transparent, what he called orbs or angels, and shimmering beings arced across what appeared to be a sky to him, and leaving long and streamer-like lines behind them. It was just a dimension he'd never experienced before. He said seeing and hearing were not separate senses. He could hear the beauty and he could see the songs. Never in his life had he ever experienced. We don't see it that way. We hear music, we see beauty, but we never see the music and hear the beauty. But he could. Light, color, love, beauty. He said it just kind of blew through me. And one of the angelic beings who was with him, along with the girl that he had seen, this being acted kind of as an interpreter of what he was experiencing in this new dimension. He said as this experience continued, he never had some of the typical things happening to him that many of the other NDEs had experienced. Writing his book later, a life review, seeing relatives that he knew. So far as he knew, he didn't see anybody he knew. Okay, so he was struggling with this. He tells about how he was adopted. In 1953, his 16-year-old mother, a sophomore in high school, had delivered him. Her boyfriend was a senior in high school. She became pregnant. That was his biological parents, and for a lot of different reasons, they chose not to keep this Eben at the time, and so they put him up for adoption. But his biological parents ended up getting married, and so they went on and had a family. And so he had some biological siblings he didn't know about. There was Ann and Richard, and there was Betsy. And Betsy had already passed away when he finally got to meet his biological family. He said that he finally got to meet his mom. Ann and Richard were his parents' names. And he got to meet Ann, and she said when she put him up for adoption, because he wanted to know why. And so she said when she put him up for adoption, they were just young and didn't feel like they could keep him. But she said she prayed when she saw him for the last time. She said, God, let this little 4-month-old boy know how much he's loved. Just answer that prayer for me. Well, if we fast forward in the story, Dr. Eben Alexander finally gets out of the hospital. He recovers from his 7-day-long coma, and they get him his health restored. And he's about 4 months on the other side of that experience. And he's always after his sister, Kathy, to give him a picture of his sister, Betsy, that he's never seen before. He didn't know what she looked like. And finally, the picture arrives in the mail. And this was the sister that was born after he was adopted and was part of a family that he never got to know until his adult years. And here's how Alexander tells it. He says, I was up in our bedroom when I opened the oversized envelope, and I pulled out a framed glossy color photo of the sister that I had never known. She was standing near her home in Southern California. She had long brown hair and deep blue eyes. He says she looked so familiar, but I couldn't place it. The next morning I got up, and I finally realized where I had seen her before. And with all the heavenly light and beauty surrounding her, he had failed to place her the day before when he first saw the picture. But the girl on the butterfly wing was Betsy. He had seen a relative on the other side after all. You see, there is a place where all earth's questions will be answered, where the torturing problems will find their solutions, where the broken things will be mended, where the lost things found, where those who have waited will in the end understand. Paul saw it. He knew. And that knowledge informed his life purpose. It's all about Christ. We're going to close today with the song, How Can It Be? I know this is a series that strikes at a lot of different heart chords. You know, it's a series that I sense it's trying to define a lot of new things in us. It's a series that's working hard to give us a new perspective so that our joy can increase. And I want to close with this song, How Can It Be? Because I think this is the mystery and this is the vision that Paul had given himself to in his life. That how can it be that? And like I said, Philippians chapter 2, you're going to see why Paul loved Jesus so much. You hang in there, because we're going to get inside the incarnation of God becoming flesh in the person of Jesus. Okay, and that defines everything. Maybe you're here and you need prayer today. If you do, just feel free to come up while this song plays. I'm going to pray, and I'll let you go. But I'm just going to have the song playing and turn it up loud so we all can hear the words. And the words are going to be on the screen. And maybe you just want to kind of soak it in here this morning. Feel free to do that. Let's pray together, shall we? Okay. Thank you, God, for this day. Thank you for your great love and grace. Thank you for your work in our world. Thank you for defining life purpose and putting us in position to have joy. God, I just ask you to firm up in each of our hearts a new vision for how we do our lives and our work and how we do relationships. Help us to live as if there is another world, because there is. And help our daily reality to be impacted by the reality that testing produces triumph in the end. That we can hammer out a truer life purpose when marriages end, when people go to jail, when relationships are severed, when accidental things happen. It's an opportunity to hammer out a truer life purpose, something that brings joy. And so I ask and pray that all of us here, maybe we've lived for other things and we want to shift it this morning. Help us to shift it so that our life sentence will be to live is Christ, to die is gain. In Jesus' name, amen. Stand with me, okay? Stand up with me. Again, come back next week. We'll continue the series. All right? Feel free to go if you need to go. If you want to hang out and talk and converse with each other, that's great too. If you want to just have a seat and rest, that's fine. If you want to come up and pray, come on up. We'll pray together, okay? Have a great day. You're dismissed.